"Don't shoot," she rasped, though the rifle in her hands never wavered. Caleb Whitlock reined his horse hard, dust boiling around its hooves, and stared down the barrel of a gun held by a woman who looked half a day from dying. Her lips were cracked white, blood crusted along her hairline where something, rifle but fist, had opened the skin. Her dress, once blue, had gone the color of the desert itself, bleached and torn at the hem where she'd used it to bind a wound on her calf. "Wasn't planning to," Caleb said, keeping his voice low, the way he'd talk to a spooked colt. He raised both hands, slow, palms out. "Lower that before your arms give out. You're shaking worse than a leaf in a norther." She didn't lower it. Her eyes, gray, sharp despite the fever glassing them over, tracked him like she expected the ground itself to betray her. "Who sent you?" "Nobody sent me. I'm riding fence line for the Bar K, ma'am, 3 miles east of here, and I heard something that wasn't wind." He nodded toward the arroyo behind her, where a dead mule lay stiffening in the sun, saddlebags slashed open, contents scattered like something had gone through them in a hurry. "Looks like somebody left you out here to die." Something in her face cracked at that. Not fear, but a fury so old and tired it looked like grief. "They didn't leave me," she said. "They tried to bury me." The rifle dipped an inch, just an inch, but it was enough for Caleb to see the tremor running the whole length of her arms. Enough to know she'd been holding that weapon up on will alone for longer than any human body should manage. She went down before he could reach her, rifle firing wild into the sky as she collapsed into the sand. He was off his horse and at her side before the echo faded, 2 fingers pressed beneath her jaw, a pulse thin, fast, but there. Heat stroke, dehydration, and under the torn sleeve of her dress, a gunshot wound gone ugly at the edges. 3 days old if it was a minute. "Hell," he muttered, and looked east toward the Bar K, then west toward nothing but sun-cracked flats stretching to a horizon that shimmered like water that wasn't there. Sheriff Dade Holloway ran that western stretch of country, and Dade Holloway had a habit of looking the other way when men like Silas Pruitt needed a body disappeared. If someone had put a bullet in this woman and left her for the buzzards, someone would come looking to make certain the job was finished. Caleb had 2 choices, and only one of them let him sleep at night. He lifted her onto his horse's front rope of blanket he kept for winter nights, careful of the wound, careful of the way her head lolled against his shoulder like something broken and precious both. She weighed almost nothing, too light for a grown woman, like the desert had already started eating her from the inside. "I don't know your name," he said to her unconscious face, "and you sure as hell don't know mine. But I'm not leaving you to finish what they started." He turned the horse toward the Bar K line shack, the one 3 miles off the main house where nobody would think to look, where he kept his own secrets stacked like cordwood against the coming winter. The wind picked up as they rode, carrying grit and the smell of creosote, and somewhere behind them, faint as a held breath, he thought he heard hoofbeats. He didn't look back. Looking back had never once made trouble disappear. By the time he reached the shack, her fever had climbed high enough that she'd started talking in her sleep. Fractured words, a name that wasn't his, and once, clear as a bell in the desert quiet, "Don't let them find the ledger." Caleb laid her on the narrow cot and looked at his hands, steady from years of rope and rifle, now trembling faintly with a fear that had nothing to do with heat or thirst. Whatever this woman was running from, it had teeth, and now those teeth were pointed at him too. She didn't wake until the second night, and when she did, it was with a gasp and a hand scrabbling for a weapon that wasn't there. "Easy," Caleb said from the stool by the stove, where he'd sat most of 2 days changing her dressing and forcing water past her cracked lips. "You're safe. Line shack on Bar K land. Nobody knows you're here but me." Her eyes found him in the lamplight, still wary, but less wild than the desert had made her. "How long?" 2 days. "Fever broke this morning." He nodded at the wound on her arm, freshly cleaned. Bullet went clean through, but it was starting to fester when I found you. You're lucky. Lucky. She laughed, short and humorless, and winced at the pull of stitches he'd sewn with a needle boiled in whiskey. That's not a word I've used in a long while. Got a name to go with that laugh? She studied him a long moment. The line of his jaw, the calluses on his hands, the way he hadn't once asked what she'd done to earn a bullet and a shallow grave. Ruth, she said finally. Ruth Calloway. Caleb Whitlock. He set a tin cup of broth within her reach. You want to tell me why Silas Pruitt's men left you out there? Or you want me to go on guessing? Her whole body went rigid. How do you know it was Pruitt's men? Found a brand on that dead mule. Circle P. And there's only one outfit runs cattle with that mark this side of the Pecos. He met her eyes, steady. I've worked this county 8 years, Miss Calloway. I know who Silas Pruitt is, and I know men don't cross him and live to talk about it. So either you're the bravest fool I ever met, or you had a reason worth dying for. Ruth's hand drifted to the collar of her dress, to something hidden beneath it. A small leather ledger, water-stained, its edges soft with handling. I was his bookkeeper's daughter. My father kept 2 sets of books for Pruitt's cattle operation, one for the bank examiners, one that showed what he really did. Rustled beeves run through with altered brands, protection money from 3 ranches too scared to refuse him, a man he had killed for asking too many questions. Her voice cracked. When Papa died last spring, I found the real ledger hidden in his desk. I should have burned it. Instead I kept it, thinking someday it might mean something. And Pruitt found out you had it. 3 nights ago. They came to the house. I ran. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. I got as far as the flats before they caught me. I thought. She stopped, jaw tightening. It doesn't matter what I thought. I'm alive because you happen to be riding fence. Caleb sat with that a long moment, listening to the wind test the shack's boards, the same wind that had nearly buried her out there in the sand. He thought of Sheriff Holloway, who took Pruitt's coin every month like clockwork. He thought of the Barcay's owner, Old Man Kessler, who'd fired hands before for less trouble than a wanted fugitive hiding in his line shack. He thought, too, of his own father, dead 9 years now, who'd once told him that a man's whole worth got decided in the moments nobody was watching to grade him on it. That ledger, he said. Where is it now? Ruth's hand closed instinctively over her collar. Safe. Good. He stood, checked the bar on the shack door, checked the loads in his rifle with the ease of long habit. Keep it that way, because if Pruitt's men find out you're still breathing, they'll tear this whole county apart looking for you, and for whatever you're carrying. You don't have to do this, Ruth said quietly. Whatever this is, you could ride back to your ranch tomorrow and forget you ever found me. Nobody would blame you. I'd blame me. Caleb blew out the lamp, leaving only starlight through the shack's one window. My mother used to say mercy isn't a debt you get to choose when to collect. Wrote us hard, that lesson. But it stuck. Outside, far off, a coyote called, and something in the dark answered it. Maybe another coyote, maybe something with 2 legs and a rifle and orders from Silas Pruitt. Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat by the door with his rifle across his knees, and somewhere past midnight, he heard it again. Hoofbeats, distant, patient, working the flats in slow methodical circles. They were looking, and sooner or later they would find the shack. They came at dawn, 3 riders cresting the low rise east of the shack, moving unhurried, the way men move when they're certain of the outcome. Ruth. Caleb's voice was flat calm, the calm of a man who'd trained himself not to panic even as his gut turned to ice. Get to the root cellar. Now, I won't hide while you will, because if they find that ledger, everything you survived for was for nothing. He hauled up the floor plank that hid the shallow cellar, barely 3 feet deep, dug for storing winter potatoes and now the only shelter he had to offer her. Whatever happens, you stay down there till I say different. You understand me? Her eyes held his, gray and fierce even now. You don't owe me this. Get in the cellar, Ruth. She went. He dropped the plank back into place and dragged the rug over it, then stepped out onto the shack's narrow porch with his rifle loose in his hands, trying to look like a man with nothing to hide. The 3 riders reined up 30 yards out. He recognized the lead man, Ezra Colt, Pruitt's foreman, a barrel-chested man with a reputation for enjoying his work more than any decent person should. Whitlock. Colt's voice carried easy across the flat morning air. Didn't expect to find you out this far from the home ranch. Line shack's mine to check, same as any hands. Caleb kept his tone easy, bored even. What brings Circle P riders onto Bar K land? Looking for a woman. Ran off from Mr. Pruitt's employ. Took something that belongs to him. Colt's eyes swept the shack, the corral, the fresh horse tracks Caleb hadn't had time to brush out. You seen anybody out here? Woman hurt bad, maybe delirious? Seen a lot of nothing for 2 days, Caleb said. Desert's been quiet. Colt's smile didn't reach his eyes. Funny, we tracked her this far. Blood trail went cold right about. His gaze dropped, lingered on the dark stains still visible on the packed dirt where Caleb had first laid her down 2 nights back, not quite scrubbed clean here. The silence that followed stretched thin as wire. Man could cut himself skinning a rabbit, Caleb said. Man could. Colt's hand drifted, slow and deliberate, toward the pistol on his hip. Or a man could be lying to me, Whitlock, and I'd take that personal. What happened next happened fast, the kind of fast that training builds into muscle before thought ever catches up. Colt's hand closed on his pistol grip. Caleb's rifle came up in the same heartbeat, and the shot that cracked across the flats sent Colt's hat spinning off his head, the bullet parting hair he'd sorely miss having. Next one won't miss, Caleb said, rifle already levered for a second round, voice gone hard as flint. Now get off Bar K land before I have real cause to bury the 3 of you out here where the coyotes won't have to work for their supper. For one endless second, nobody moved. Then Colt's jaw worked, calculating odds the way men like him always did, not out of fear of dying, but out of hatred for losing. This ain't finished, Colt said, gathering his reins. With more men. I know. Caleb set the rifle down, met her eyes. And when they do, we won't be here waiting for them. Where do we go? Judge Pemberton, 2 counties over. Man's incorruptible. Pruitt's tried buying him twice and failed both times. If we get that ledger into his hands, it's not your word against Pruitt's anymore. It's evidence. He was already moving, gathering supplies, checking the second horse in the corral. It's a 2-day ride, hard country, and Pruitt's men will be watching every trail between here and there. Ruth's hand found his sleeve, gripping tight. You could have let them ride on, told them the truth, handed me over and gone back to your quiet life. Some things a man can't hand over, Caleb said, and still call himself a man. Behind them, on the horizon, dust rose again. Not departing this time, but gathering, the way storm clouds gather before they break. They rode through the worst of the heat and made camp in a dry wash where the walls of red rock gave some shelter from wind and watching eyes both. Caleb built no fire. Smoke carried too far in flat country, and they ate hardtack and jerky in the blue hush of dusk, listening to the desert settle into its nighttime sounds. You're bleeding again, Caleb said, nodding at the fresh red seeping through her sleeve where the ride had strained her stitches. It's nothing. Something, or I wouldn't have mentioned it. He moved closer, gentle in the way big men learn to be gentle, and began redressing the wound by the last gray light. His hands were steady, sure, the hands of a man who'd tended sick calves and broken horses and, apparently now, wounded women with equal patience. You've done this before, Ruth said, watching his face rather than the wound. Doctored plenty of animals. Never a person till you. He tied off the bandage, careful not to pull too tight. Learned young. My mother got sick when I was 12. Consumption, the doctor said, though there wasn't much a doctor could do for it out here. I tended her myself, best I could, for near 2 years before she passed. He didn't look up as he spoke, focused on his work. Guess I never stopped tending things after that. I'm sorry. Long time ago. But something in his jaw tightened, the old grief still living close under the surface. What about you? Ledger aside, who is Ruth Calloway, really? She was quiet a moment, turning something over in her hands. A small tin locket, dented, its clasp worn smooth with handling. My mother gave me this before she died. Told me it held her whole heart in it, small enough to carry anywhere. She opened it, revealing a faded daguerreotype of a young woman with Ruth's same steady eyes. I used to think that was foolish, a heart small enough to fit in your pocket. Now I understand. It's not about size. It's about what you refuse to let go of, no matter how heavy the running gets. Your father's ledger, Caleb said quietly. That's the same thing to you, isn't it? Not just evidence. It's what's left of him. Ruth's eyes glistened in the dim light. He was a coward most of his life. Kept 2 sets of books because it was easier than standing up to Pruitt. But at the end, he told me where to find the true ledger. Told me someone had to make it matter, even if it cost him. Her voice broke, just slightly. I think that's the bravest thing he ever did. And I won't let it be for nothing. Caleb reached out, not thinking, and covered her hand with his. It won't be. I swear it. You don't make promises like that to a stranger. You're not a stranger. Not anymore. His thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles. Careful. Questioning. Man doesn't sit up 2 nights watching over somebody and call them a stranger by the 3rd. The space between them had narrowed without either quite noticing. Close enough that Ruth could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Close enough that Caleb could hear the catch in her breath. Scars mean it lived, he said softly, nodding at the fresh wound on her arm. The older ones he'd noticed on her hands from years of hard work. That's what my mother used to say about the land out here. Everything that survives it carries marks to prove the fight was worth having. And you? Ruth asked. What scars do you carry? Enough to know that some things are worth fighting for, even when the smart money says to ride the other way. He didn't pull his hand back. I stopped believing that for a while after my mother died. Figured the world took more than it gave, and a man was a fool to risk anything for anybody. Then I found a half-dead woman holding a rifle steadier than most grown men manage, and I remembered. Remembered what? That some things are worth the risk. The kiss, when it came, was slow and careful, the kind born of 2 people who'd both learned the hard way what it cost to trust. Ruth's hand came up to rest against his jaw, and for one suspended moment, the desert's dangers, Pruitt, Colt, the men surely combing the flats even now, fell silent under the weight of something gentler. They broke apart slowly, foreheads resting together, breath mingling in the cooling air. 2 days to the judge, Caleb said quietly, and half that country crawling with Pruitt's riders. Then we'd best not waste the moonlight, Ruth said, and there was steel back in her voice now, tempered by the softness that had come before it. We ride at first light. Behind them, far off across the darkening flats, a rifle shot cracked once against the silence. Not close, but not far enough to ignore either. Somewhere out there, Ezra Colt and his riders were still hunting, and the peace of the dry wash camp had already run its course. They reached the outskirts of Alma Springs by mid-afternoon on the 2nd day, horses lathered and legs trembling from the hard pace, only to find Ezra Colt and 6 riders waiting at the very crossroads that led to Judge Pemberton's courthouse. Should have known you'd try for the law, Colt called out, his men fanning into a loose crescent across the road. Pruitt figured you might. That's why we're here instead of there. Caleb reined up, positioning his horse between Ruth and the guns. Last chance, Colt. Let us pass, and I won't put you in the ground for it. Colt laughed, ugly and confident with 6 guns at his back against Caleb's 1. You're outnumbered 6-1, Whitlock. This is where your fool errand ends. Not quite 6-1. A new voice cut across the flat, and from behind a stand of cottonwoods along the creek bank, Judge Pemberton himself emerged, flanked by 4 armed deputies, rifles already leveled. I received word yesterday that Silas Pruitt's men might come looking to silence a witness before she could reach my court. Seemed prudent to meet the trouble halfway. The color drained from Colt's face as he did the arithmetic on odds that had just reversed against him. This doesn't concern the law, Colt tried. Private matter between Pruitt and murder and witness tampering concern the law considerably, Judge Pemberton said mildly, particularly when the witness rides into my jurisdiction bleeding from a bullet wound and carrying evidence of cattle rustling, extortion, and worse against half the ranches in this county. His eyes moved to Ruth. I take it you're Miss Calloway. Your father's associate at the Territorial Bank sent word months ago that such a ledger might exist. We'd rather given up hope of it surfacing. Ruth's hand moved to her collar, drawing out the water-stained ledger at last, holding it up like a shield and a sword both. It's all here, Your Honor. Every altered brand, every payment, every name. Colt's hand twitched toward his pistol. A last desperate gamble. But the click of 4 rifles cocking in unison stole whatever courage remained in it. Don't, Caleb said quietly. You've lost this hand, Colt. A wise man knows when to fold. For a long, taut moment, nothing moved but the wind stirring dust along the road. Then Colt's shoulders sagged, and he raised his hands slow, the fight going out of him all at once. Deputies, Judge Pemberton said, relieve these gentlemen of their weapons. I believe Mr. Pruitt will have considerable explaining to do once this ledger's contents become public record, and I suspect his foreman here has information that might lighten his own sentence, should he choose to cooperate. It took another hour to see the arrests properly made, statements begun, the machinery of justice grinding into motion at last after months of Pruitt's money keeping it still. Through it all, Ruth stood straight-backed beside Caleb, watching the ledger, her father's quiet, posthumous act of courage. Finally do the work he died hoping it might do. When it was done, when Colt and his men had been marched off toward the jailhouse and the ledger sat safe in Judge Pemberton's keeping, Ruth finally allowed herself to sag, exhaustion and relief washing over her in equal measure. Caleb caught her before she could fall, steady as he'd been from the first moment he'd found her in the desert. It's over, he said. Is it? Her eyes searched his face. Pruitt will send more men. This isn't finished, not truly, not until. It's finished for you, Caleb said gently. The law has what it needs now. You did what your father couldn't. You made it matter. He brushed a strand of dust-caked hair from her face, tender in a way that had nothing left to hide behind. The rest isn't your fight to carry alone anymore. And whose fight is it, then? Ours, he said simply, if you'll have it that way. She didn't answer with words. She answered by stepping into the circle of his arms and staying there, weary and whole and alive in a way she hadn't quite believed possible 3 days earlier, when she'd faced down a stranger's rifle with nothing left but grit and her father's secret. Silas Pruitt stood trial that autumn and was sentenced to 15 years in the Territorial Prison. His empire of quiet extortion dismantled brand by brand as the ledger's evidence came to light. Ezra Colt, true to Judge Pemberton's prediction, traded testimony for a lighter sentence, and the ranches that had paid protection money for years finally kept what was rightfully theirs. Caleb Whitlock never went back to riding fence for the Bar K. Old man Kessler, moved by the whole affair, deeded him 40 acres near the creek as thanks for the trouble Pruitt's men had caused on Bar K land, and Caleb built a small house there with his own hands, the same steady hands that had once stitched a stranger's wound by lamplight. Ruth Calloway kept her mother's locket, and beside the faded daguerreotype, she added a second photograph in time. Herself and Caleb on their wedding day, taken on the porch of that small house by the creek, her father's ledger long since surrendered but never forgotten. Years later, When their own daughter asked why her mother kept an old tin locket that wouldn't quite close anymore, Ruth would smile and tell her it wasn't about what fit inside. It was about what you refused to let go of, no matter how heavy the running got. Some evenings still, Caleb and Ruth would ride out to the dry wash where they'd once camped beneath a dangerous sky, and watch the sun bleed orange and gold across the same flats where a half-dead woman had once held a rifle steady against a stranger, and where that stranger had chosen, against every ounce of good sense, to risk everything for her anyway.